Hello and welcome to the SAP LSMW training preview. My name is Pat Brazel. I'm an accountant and SAP certified FICO consultant. This is my certificate. As you can see, the certificate reads My SAP Financials, Managerial and Financial Accounting, usually referred to as FICO. I'm also an LSMW specialist and I've headed up the data migration element of many SAP and indeed non-SAP implementation projects. You can see my full profile in the SAP trainer profile page on SAP-WebDypro. The training material in this course is broken down into 10 modules for ease of viewing. So you can go directly to the area of particular interest without having to rewind or fast forward. However, the first time you view these videos, I would urge you to view them in order, starting with number 1, GL master data. The reason I say this is that in the earlier videos, I cover quite a few general topics, including how I create my template input files in Excel, then add test data, and finally save each sheet in the workbook as a tab delimited text file. So, as not to show the same procedure over and over again, in the later tutorials, I do these tasks offline. I want to emphasize that these tutorials are not videos where you just see captions, mouse clicks, and keystrokes. All of these modules contain commentary where I explain in detail what I am doing and why. There are also many tips on how to avoid and deal with common problems and error messages. If you're comparing this course with classroom-based training, bear in mind that every minute in this training is aimed at increasing and then reinforcing your knowledge of LSMW. There is no small talk, no coffee breaks, no listening to questions that you already know the answers to, and you're not paying for your own practice time, as is the case in a classroom situation. Unlike in a classroom situation, with this training, you get to watch the tutorials as many times as you want within the license period. You also get to download the LSMW objects that you see created so that you can import them into your own test system and use them to load test data. In due course, you can in fact use them to load live data. You also get to download the Excel templates I create and the actual data files I use. When loading data in your own system, you will of course need to tweak the data to suit the requirements of your own system. For example, you will need to check what fields are mandatory in your system and then enter valid values in your data files. If you do not have access to an SAP test system, don't worry. Online access to a fully functional test system is available. You might want to check out sandboxsap.com, which costs just $30 per month without a commitment to any longer than 1 month. But there are other alternatives out there, so do check around. The main point to remember is that with this training, you can replicate what you see in the tutorials in your own test system. And you get to practice over and over for as long as it takes to become familiar with the processes. Once you're comfortable with loading data, I would encourage you to go beyond what you see in the tutorials by increasing the number of fields you populate in each structure or table. There's no particular need to increase the number of records that you load during testing unless you feel that system performance may be an issue for you. But remember, quality, not quantity, is what is important here. As you will see, the training modules deal with the loading of data in the financial accounting area. However, the principles involved are exactly the same, whatever the type of data you're loading. So even if you have no interest in financial accounting, these tutorials are for you. If you study the material and then practice the steps in your test system, there is no reason why you cannot become an LSMW specialist in a short period of time. Of course, this does presuppose that you already have a basic knowledge of SAP. Perhaps as an experienced end user or a functional consultant who is not familiar with LSMW. To launch this training course, a 50% discount is being offered to the first 25 subscribers. Just register on SAP-WebDypro and enter the coupon code you see on the site. You will then be charged only $248 for 3 months access to the training material. If at any stage in the future, after the initial subscription period has expired, you need to refresh your knowledge of LSMW, you can review the training material for 1 month at a time at a discount of just over 76% of the full price. So if you subscribe for the initial 3-month period, you can resubscribe as many times as you want at a cost of only $39 per month. On the subject of cost, please do check out how much this training would cost at your nearest training center. For example, I know that in the US, there is a similar 5-day course which costs $3,250. That's $650 per day. I have personally spent well over $10,000 on classroom-based training, but that was back in the days when online training wasn't readily available. I hope you will agree that this online training is good value for money. Now, let's take a look at what is covered in the training course. Okay, so we're going to look at creating projects, sub-projects, and objects. Then we go to recording a transaction and saving it as an object. We will see how to maintain object attributes, create source structures, define fields in the source structures, link the source structures to the SAP structures and tables, map source fields to the SAP fields, create and specify source files, link source files to source structures, read in the data files, display the data we've just read in, convert the source data by running the conversion program, display that converted data, and then if we're using direct input, we run the direct input program, or if we are using batch input, we create and run the batch input sessions. Now, as mentioned, the course is divided into 10 modules. First one is GL accounts, chart of accounts and company code segments. So this is GL master data, GL balances and open items. We create vendor accounts. We create vendor open items. We then create customer accounts, customer open items. Then we create fixed assets. So we create the fixed asset master. We add opening values at the start of the current fiscal year, and we add transactions during the current fiscal year. We will also look at loading data based on recordings of transactions. We have alternative methods, BAPI and iDocs. And finally, we look at LSMW administration. Now, we have some general topics that are covered. We cover input methods, batch, direct, recordings, BAPI, and iDoc. We look at how best to create our source fields, whether to copy from the data repository, copy from another object, upload from a text file, or upload from a data file. We look at how to create and format input files. We look at user menu options, how to export LSMW projects to a text file, and how to import LSMW objects from a text file. And then we look at LSMW administration and how to manage your LSMW projects, sub-projects, and objects. Now, we also have available to download all LSMW objects seen in the tutorials. And these can be imported into LSMW in other SAP systems. All spreadsheets used to build the input files are available for download, as are all tab delimited text input files. And these can all be used as templates in real-world data migration projects. As this is a preview of the full course, you are now going to see excerpts from the start and end of 7 modules. You will see the LSMW objects being created, and the video then skips to the last step, which is the loading of the data. You then see the end results, i.e. the records that were loaded as viewed through the application. For example, You will see general ledger accounts and line items, customer and vendor accounts with open items, and fixed assets with values. Now, as you can see, we're in transaction LSMW, and this is the initial screen. We're now going to create our project, our sub-project, and our first object, which is going to be a GL master. I've just entered LSMW tutorial. I go to create this entry. And you give it a description. So I'm just going to tutorial. You can give it something meaningful if you want. Now it prompts you to create a sub-project within the main project, and I'm just going to call that financials, and give it. And it asks for an object, so I'm going to call this GL master, and call that. And hit return. Okay, so now it's created our project, sub-project, and object. We go to continue, F8. Now we get our list of tasks that we need to complete. The first one is to maintain the object attributes. Okay. Now, as you can see, when you enter this screen initially, everything is grayed out. Again, it's one of the quirks in SAP. You'd probably expect it to be ready for input, but it's not. So you click on this here. Okay, now you get to enter the attributes for the object. We're going to use standard batch or direct input for this one. So you just click on here and look for an object that suits the task. Now, as it happens, what we're looking for is very high up here on the list. It's object 0010, which is GL account master record. Select that. You can double click or click return. And now you need to pick a method. And for this one, we have two methods. One is a hierarchy structure, the other is a flat structure. Flat structure means that all of the data is in one very wide table. I prefer the hierarchy structure because it segments the data into, for instance, header, chart of account segment, and company code segment. The reason I recommend doing this is that it reduces the amount of data, the number of fields in any given file that you're going to upload. And it makes it easier to isolate problems when you're troubleshooting later on as you're loading data and you encounter problems, which I'm afraid you do quite often in LSMW. But I'm going to show you how to handle those errors later on. So we pick on this one here. Okay, so now we've created the basics of our object attributes. So now we've configured LSMW to load general ledger master data, and this is where we create the batch to do that job. Up here we have the default path for the converted file with our input data. This relates to earlier releases. We don't have to worry about that. This relates to a file that doesn't have a BGR00 structure, but we already have one. If we didn't have one, we'd have to enter some data at this stage when we execute this program. And here we can bypass the batch input and just go direct, but I don't suggest we do that because it's safer to use batch input. And here, check file only. So if we run that, it'll tell us if we have any errors. Okay, so it's just saying for this file, the character for the empty field is /. We know that already. And this is the session name, which is our object name. And no terminations have been found, which means basically no errors have been found. So that's okay. Okay, so now we'll uncheck this box here and that means we're going to create a batch input session. Okay, session name was open, created, session name GL master. Okay, so let's go back out and go to the next step, which is run batch input session. So we'll double click on this. Okay, and this takes us to the batch input session overview, which is what you get when you run transaction SM35. So it's not part of LSMW. And here's the batch that we created. Now, let's process that batch. Here we have a number of options. You can process the batch in the foreground, but that takes you through step by step as if you were running the transaction through the application, which is okay for troubleshooting, but where you have a large number of records, this isn't feasible. It would take far too long. What I normally do is I just select this, display errors only. So it will stop if it encounters an error. So for instance, if you've got data values that are incorrect or you're missing mandatory data, it will stop at the errors. If you don't have any errors, then the batch will process successfully. So let's do that. Okay, so now it's saying the batch input session has been completed, and that means that we've been successful. So we've a number of options. You can look at the session overview, but that's not really necessary in this case. So I'm going to exit the batch at this stage, and we're going to take a look at the GL accounts that we've just created. Okay, so we're at the easy access menu. So let's go to transaction FS00. So here you can see it has defaulted to the last GL account that we created, which is the sample profit and loss account. If you remember, these are the accounts that we created, and this is the last one here. Okay, this is our data input file for the BSK00 segment with the account numbers. So I don't want to edit this, I'll just go to display. Okay, and here's the information we entered. This is the group, this is the description for the group. The actual code was SAKO. These are the short and long text that we entered. If this is the group account number we entered, you can go back and look at this for yourselves. Currency and so on. We selected line item display for this one. Let's look at one of the balance sheet accounts. We had 108, 109, 110, and 111. So let's look at 144111. Okay, and if you remember, this was a balance sheet account with open item management. And here we have open item management selected and line item display. Going to the description. Again, group account here, and the short and long text that we entered. So that's it for General Ledger Master. We've successfully created General Ledger accounts using LSMW. In the next tutorial, you'll see how to load General Ledger balances and open items, and we'll be using the GL accounts that we've just created in this tutorial. Now in this tutorial, we're going to load GL balances and open items. So we're in this project, this sub-project, and let's create a new object. So we call this GL transactions. Okay, we hit the create button, and we'll just call this GL. Okay, and we continue from there. And we maintain the object attributes just in here. So now we've completed all the steps here that will allow us to load our GL documents. So the next step is to start direct input program. Okay, now we'll just select the program here. There is a transaction, but it's quite tricky to use. This is easier. Okay, so here we've got the path to the file with our converted data. And we have some options here. This one allows us to check before actually posting. This is for structures from old releases, not applicable here, nor is this. Now here we have a few options. Now in actual fact, we can turn this into a batch input session if we select B here. This is one of the quirks within LSMW. As we saw earlier, our default is direct input, but we have the option to change here. But we're going to just select direct input to show how this works. So now we have D selected here. Okay, we have a small number of documents, so no need to change this value here. I'm going to select log here rather than dialog box because I don't want to pop up messages. I just want to see the results at the end, and I'm going to run it in test mode. Execute. Okay, so this is looking okay. It just tells us what the empty field symbol is here, and no terminations were found, so that's good. That looks like it's going to work. So go back up. So we'll uncheck this box here and execute again. Okay, and this message indicates that everything was successful. So let's go back. Go back out again. So now let's have a look at the two documents that we created. Go back to the main menu. Okay, we look at document display here. Okay, this is the last document created, which is the second of our two. Okay, and here we see we have debited 144,108 with 10,000 GBP, and we have credited our balance sheet account that we created with 10,000. Okay, go to the header. See some more information. This is the header text that we entered. This is the reference document that we entered. Document date, posting date. This is the session, which is our object in LSMW. And the currency was GBP, and our local currency is US dollars. So that looks okay. Go back to the other one, which was the previous document. And here we see the posting to our sample P&L account, 10,000 US dollars, and the other side of the entry to the contra account for GL loading. It's the cost center we entered, the reference we gave it, company code, look at the header information again. Okay, header text and some additional information. Okay, so our two documents were posted successfully. So that's it for this tutorial on loading general ledger documents using LSMW. In the next tutorial, we'll be looking at accounts payable master data, and we'll be creating vendors using LSMW. In this tutorial, we're going to create vendor accounts. So we need to create a new object, and let's call it AP for accounts payable, AP master. Okay, and we need to create that entry, give it a description. So create vendor master records. Okay, and then we go to continue, F8. And here we're going to maintain the object attributes. Now we've configured all the steps necessary to create vendor master data with LSMW. So the next step is to create the batch input session. We do that here. Okay, this is our file containing the converted data. We're going to check that first, so we'll check this box here. I don't want to see dialog boxes, I just want to see the results in log format. And I'm going to execute here. Okay, that's our file. That's our special character for empty fields. And no terminations have been found, which is good. So now let's go back out, uncheck this box, and execute again. Okay, so a session has been created called AP Master, which is the name of our LSMW object. Let's go back out again, and one more time. And let's run that batch input session. So we're being taken to transaction SM35. This is our session. We're going to process that. As before, I'm only going to ask it to display errors if there are any. Leave everything else as is and process that. And okay, so the processing is completed, and that normally means that everything has been successful. No errors were displayed, which is good. You can look at the session overview if you want, but I'm just going to exit here. Now at this stage, I want to take a look at the vendors that we've just created. So I go to transaction FK03. Okay, and it defaults to the last vendor created, which was vendor B from our file. Now these are all checked, so I just look at all of that. Okay, and this is our vendor B. Search term is here. GB was the country. Go to the next section. Okay, there's some default values in here, nothing that we entered. Didn't enter any bank data. Okay, this is the reconciliation account we specified. This is the sort key. This was the planning group, cash management group. So we didn't enter a lot of data, but everything we've entered is here and it's correct. Let's go back out. Okay, and we look at the previous one, which is 5. And that was vendor A. Again, just go through the sections here. And again, our reconciliation account, sort key, cash management group, and so forth. Okay, so that's our 2 vendors created successfully with LSMW. In the next tutorial, we'll be adding line items for those vendor accounts. In this tutorial, we will see how to load vendor open items. So first we need to create an object for loading those vendor open items. So let's just call it AP_ open items, and we'll create that. So this is going to be okay, and we continue from there. And then we need to maintain our object attributes. Go to change mode, and we have to select our object. Now, in fact, for this object, we're going to use the same as we used for general ledger documents. So we're going to use 0100, which is financial documents. And I'll show you later how we differentiate these from general ledger documents or indeed accounts receivable documents. We take the standard method here, and that defaults into D for direct input, and then we save and go back out to the next step. So now we've completed all the steps necessary to load our vendor open items using LSMW. So let's go to the last step here, which is Start Direct Input Program. Double click. Okay, we take the program here. Okay, now we will check the file first. Again, I just want to look at the log. And here, as before, we have an option to create a batch input session if we wanted to. But I'm just going to leave it at D. Okay, so let's run that. Okay, so it has checked this file here. Tells us that the empty field character is / and no terminations have been found, so that looks fine. So let's go back, remove the check from here, and execute again. Okay, so now we get this message, which isn't very meaningful really, but since we don't have any errors, it looks like everything is fine. So let's go and check that. Okay, I'm in accounting, financial accounting, accounts payable. I'm going to go to account, I'm going to go to display line items, and this is the last vendor that we created, so let's run that. Okay, and as you can see, we have 2 line items, which is what I would expect. We have an invoice for $8,000 and a credit note for $4,000. So let's take a look at one of those line items. Okay. Yeah, so if you remember, we actually loaded in 5,000 GBP at an exchange rate of 1.6, which gives us the 8,000 in local currency. Yeah. So this vendor, we entered an invoice and a credit note both in GBP. And these are the dates we entered. So this looks fine. Let's go back out. And we'll take a look at the credit note as well. Yep, 2,500 sterling, giving me $4,000 US. We look at some header information. Okay, this is the session name that posted it, which is our object name in LSMW. This is the transaction code we used. And this is the reference number. This is the text that I entered. This is the document type. So that looks fine. If we go back one more step here, and let's look at the other vendor, which is 100345, and run that. I would expect to see 2 documents here also. Okay. Yeah, and this time we have an invoice for $10,000 and a credit note for $5,000. The invoice being credit entry. And if we look at the invoice, okay, and our currency is US dollars, as entered. And we can look at the document header here again. Again, invoice, document type KR, header text. This is the number I entered here. Transaction code, special name, looks fine. Look at the document overview for this one. Okay, and these are our debits and credits. So this is the vendor, we call him vendor A, and this is the GL account, contra for accounts payable loading. So it's an invoice, so we credited the vendor and we debited the contra account. And the posting key for GL for debits 40, and for vendors 31 for invoices. Again, this is the information that we entered, so everything looks fine. So let's go back out again. Okay, so that's it for loading vendor open items using LSMW. In the next tutorial, we'll be creating customer master data. So we'll create some customers using LSMW. In this next tutorial, we're going to create customer accounts using LSMW. So first, let's create an object. And we'll call it AR for accounts receivable master. Okay, and we go to create the entry. And we'll just call this customer master data. Okay, and we can continue from there. And the first step is to maintain the object attributes. Do that here. Go to change mode. Select the object we want to use. So if we scroll down through here, well, we don't have to scroll actually. We go to this one here, 0050, customer master. Select that. Select the method. Okay. This is the standard one here, first one. Okay. And it has defaulted in batch input. That's fine. Now we need to save that. And go back out to LSMW. So now we've configured LSMW to load accounts receivable master data. So the next step is to create the batch input session to do that. So let's go in here. Okay, and we're going to do check file first. And I want to look at the log and execute. This is the file containing the converted data. Okay, so it's checked that file. Again, it's telling us the symbol for the empty field, and no terminations have been found, which is good. So we go back out again, uncheck this, and create the batch. Okay, so AR underscore master opened and created. Let's go to the next step and run batch input session. Transaction SM35, as you see here. This is the batch. Go to process. Again, I want to run it with display errors only. Process. Okay, so the processing is completed. Again, we can look at the session overview if we want, but I'm not going to in this case. So I'm just going to exit out here, and we're going to go and take a look at the customers that we created. So let's go to accounting, financial accounting, accounts receivable, master records, Let's go to FD03, display. Okay. And now it's defaulting to the last customer created, which is customer B here, number 27. Okay, so here's the name, customer B, the search term, 2 Backstreet, London, GB. Some more data here, some default values here. Let's look at company code data. Here's our reconciliation account. Payment transactions, terms of payment here. Payment method, number 9. Okay, that one looks okay. Let's look at number 26, which should be customer A. So here we see the company code data. We have terms of payment and payment methods. Now let's go to general data. Okay, customer A, street house number, New York, US. And let's go back out. So that completes our tutorial on loading customer accounts. In the next tutorial, we'll be loading customer open items. So we'll be creating invoices and credit notes. In this tutorial, we're going to create accounts receivable open items. So we'll be creating customer invoices and customer credit notes. Now, you may remember that when we created general ledger open items and balances and accounts receivable open items, we used object number 0100, which is called financial documents. Now, we're going to use that same object again for accounts receivable open items, but instead of creating an object here and going through all of the various steps, what we're going to do is copy the object that we use to create vendor open items. So in this screen here, we go to the menu bar and press Go to, Administration. Now we're taken to the LSMW administration screen where we have all these projects down the left-hand side. So we scroll down and we find our project, which is called LSMW tutorial. We expand on that. We go to our sub-project called Financials. And here are the objects that we created earlier. Now, we're going to copy vendor open items. So that's this object here. So we place the cursor on here and we go to copy. Now we're asked where we're copying it to. So we can copy it to another project if we want, but we're not going to do that. So we're going to copy it to this project and this sub-project, but we're going to give it another name. Now, if you remember, when we were converting the data for accounts payable open items, we had a problem with the length of the field path. It was too long. And that's because it includes this object name, and we were, from memory, I think about 3 characters too long. So instead of having to adjust the path later, we're going to change the name here and make it accounts receivable, AR, OI. Okay, so we're copying it to this object here. So we're actually creating this object in this step. Okay, so that's been created, AR, OI. However, as you can see, it has brought the name from the object that was copied. Now we don't want that. So we place the cursor here and we go to change or edit entry. Okay, and now we get to call this customer open items. And we continue. Okay, now we have the description, customer open items. Now we can go back out here and go back to our LSMW initial screen and enter this object number and proceed from there. The alternative is just to place the cursor on here, not on the description, but on the object name, and go to Edit Entry. Now we're taken to the first screen here in our LSMW configuration. And the first one is to maintain object attributes. But of course, we don't have to carry out this step because we've already copied from an existing object. However, we're going to take a look at what has been copied. Okay, we've now completed all the steps we need to load our customer open items. So we need to just execute the last step here, which is Start Direct Input Program. Double click. Take the default value for the program here. Okay, and we're going to look at the log first. We're going to do check file only. And here we need to enter D for direct input, or B if we want to create a batch input session. But I'm just going to go with D here. Okay, and now I execute it. Okay, so it's checked this file, which contains our converted data. And it tells us that the empty field symbol is / and no terminations were found. So that looks good. So go back out again, uncheck this box, and execute. Okay, so it's giving us just this simple message here, which indicates that no errors were found. The next thing we need to do is to go and look at the two customer accounts and view the documents that we've just created. So just go back out here first. Okay, now I've opened another session, so let's just go to that. Okay, and this is the path: accounting, financial accounting, accounts receivable, the account, and this transaction here, display or change line items. Okay, and our account is 26, that's the first one. And we're just going to display open items. Okay, and these are the two documents that we created. One is an invoice, one is a credit note. Okay, let's just look at this one here. Okay, the amount is $5,000. Some default values for payment terms. If we look at the header, okay, we see the header text that I entered here, the document date, the posting date, the period, the entry date, the currency, the session name that created the document. That's all right. Look at the overview. Okay. So this is a credit note. We've credited customer A, and we've debited the contra account for data loading. So that looks good. If we want to look at the other one, just very briefly. Okay. This time the value is 10,000. Again, all of the rest is quite similar. If we look at the overview, okay, this time we see it's an invoice, posting key 01. We've debited customer A with 10,000 US, and we've credited our contra account with 10,000. So that looks fine. Now let's take a look at customer number 27. Again, we find two documents here, an invoice and a credit note. We look at the first one here. Okay. And here we see that the document currency was GBP. The amount was 2,500. Local currency amount 4,000 US dollars. Look at the overview. Okay, the posting key here is 11, which is for a credit note. Customer account 27, 2,500 GBP. Debit to GL 144110, 2,500 GBP. Looks fine. Okay, let's go back out again. So that completes our tutorial on loading customer open items using LSMW. In the next tutorial, we're going to look at how we load fixed asset data. So we'll be creating fixed asset master data, and we'll be loading in opening balances at the start of the current year and transactions during the current year. In this tutorial, we're going to load fixed asset data, both asset master data and transactions. So first we create an object. So we call it fixed assets. Give it a name. Okay, and continue from there. Okay, and now we need to maintain the object attributes. Go to change mode, and let's find the fixed asset object. Okay, so here it is here, 0160 fixed assets. And we go to here for a method. There are two methods, batch input and direct input. I would recommend batch input. Direct input is more tricky. It is faster to load, but there are more things to go wrong there. We'll be looking at direct input later anyway, but let's take batch input for now. Okay, and that's all we need there. So we save that and we go back out to our main menu. Okay, so now we've completed all the steps down as far as display converted data. And this next step here says create batch input session. So let's just select that. Okay, now this says test run without DB update. No mention of creating a batch input session, but let's run it in test mode anyway. Okay, so two records have been read in. No updates because it's test mode, and no errors, which is good. So now let's uncheck this and execute. Now, if you notice, it didn't create a batch input session. It has updated directly. So one of the quirks about this particular object in LSMW, although it says batch input and it says create a batch input session, and then the next step is to run that session, it actually doesn't create the batch input session at all. It updates directly. But that's okay. So long as there are no errors and we have two updates here, that's fine. So now let's go and have a look at the two assets that we've just created. Let's go back out here first. Now I have another session running, so I'll just go to that now. Okay, and I go to transaction AS93 display. Okay, now this should be the last asset that was created. Let's just make sure, give it this one. Okay, it's telling me 10054 doesn't exist. So 52 and 53 have been created. And let's look at the master data first. Okay, if you remember, this is the text we put in. This is a test asset. This is an additional description. The main asset number. These are defaulting from the asset class, these values here. capitalization date we'd entered. This is the cost center, the responsible cost center that we entered. Okay, we didn't enter any information for these tabs here. Now I've got 7 actual depreciation areas here. That all looks fine. This is a special tax depreciation area, so there's no value in here for ordinary depreciation. We'll go to the values. Okay. Now, if you're not familiar with Asset Explorer or Asset Accounting, bear with me. I'll just show you some of the values here. Okay. So this is the acquisition production cost at the start of the year, 1.2 million, which is what we entered. And then we entered 2 transactions during the year, if you remember, for this asset, the first asset. Yeah, a total of 300,000, which appears in here. Then if we look at posted values, okay, the significant entry is this one here, which is the ordinary depreciation posted during the current year. Now, my transfer date is at the end of February. So up to the end of February, I've told it that I've posted in my legacy system $20,000 of depreciation. It then plans the rest of the depreciation based on the depreciation terms for in the asset master, which defaulted in from the asset class. I could have overwritten that if I wanted to, of course, but the point being that all of this looks pretty okay. Let's just look at the second one by changing this value here. Okay. Now, this one I entered 600,000 as the APC value at the start of the year. Let's look at the plan values here. Oh, we've got 10,000 in here before we leave here. Depreciation in the current year. Okay. So, okay, these are the 3 transactions that we entered for this particular asset. And as you can see, the total to 195, which is the APC change during the current year. So all of that looks pretty good. What we've just seen is how to load asset master data and asset transactional data using LSMW and with batch input mode selected. That concludes the LSMW configuration training preview. Next, you will see instructions on how to register for the full LSMW configuration training course. Thank you for watching.